ever seen those word magnets for the refrigerator? You know, those simple black and white magnets that you can move around and make sentences that sound like something out of a poetry book? Or maybe Mad Libs, where you ask a friend to fill in blanks with nouns, verbs, and adjectives without knowing what the story is about, and when you read it afterward, the story is ridiculous? Most people would easily recognize these as word games, but that doesn't mean that they are insignificant. In fact, Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of the most important philosophers of the 20th century, proposes that games are the primary, if not only method, that we use to acquire language. Now, Wittgenstein was before refrigerator magnets and Mad Libs, so he was talking about other types of games. In fact, Wittgenstein proposed that language itself was just a series of games, and that trying to locate meaning within words was futile. The best that we could hope for is to understand how language is used. This is the perspective we are going to take for this lesson because we are going to explore many uses of language by focusing on figures of speech. You may be thinking that the term figure of speech is only applicable when someone is misunderstood or when there is confusion about how someone phrases their ideas. But figures of speech have a very specific meaning and a long history in the study of persuasion. They are an all-encompassing term for what are known as schemes and tropes, and we will discuss as many of these as possible in this video. But keep in mind that there are hundreds of figures of speech and that we cannot cover all of them in 10 minutes. In fact, there are entire college courses that have been devoted to the study of schemes and tropes. Schemes are generally known as figures of speech that focus on the sequence of words, or more specifically, how to change the sequence of words in a sentence. Tropes, on the other hand, aren't about the order of words, but instead changing the meaning of the words themselves. So let's start with schemes. You are probably familiar with some schemes already. Actually, we already covered one called Antithesis, but we call it refutation. And that is exactly what antithesis is, the refutation of an argument in your speech. But when it comes to really understanding this figure of speech, you need to realize that you can refute arguments that were never made by your opponents. You can use antithesis in the first affirmative to undermine arguments that you anticipate your opponents will make. So antithesis is really the refutation of any argument, regardless of who makes it. You can refute the author of a piece of evidence that isn't present. There are other popular schemes that you are likely familiar with, like rhyme. Something as simple as having words end with the same sound can be profoundly persuasive. In one of the most famous court cases of our generation, the O.J. Simpson trial, the lawyer for the defense used the fact that the bloody gloves found at the crime scene were too small for the defendant to create a simple and memorable rhyme. If the glove don't fit, you must acquit. Or you might be familiar with the tongue twister, she sells seashells by the seashore. This is an example of another scheme, alliteration. This is where the beginning of words sound alike. You can even have the middle vowels of a word sound alike, and that is known as assonance. Famous rap artist Eminem makes constant use of assonance in his Oscar-winning song, Lose Yourself. Oh, there goes Rabbit, he choked, he's so mad, but he won't give up that easy. No, he won't have it. He knows his whole back's to these ropes. It don't matter, he's dope, he knows that, but he's broke. He's so stagnant, he knows when he goes back to this mobile home, that's when it's back to the lab again, yo. Okay, I'm not a rapper. Regardless, these three schemes are very popular in the English language, but there are some that aren't as well known, yet still very powerful when properly used in debate. One very powerful scheme for debate is antithesis. You may know this word or refer to the opposite of something. As a scheme, it is used to make opposite words in the same sentence for contrasting effect. Let's take an example from the movie The Great Debaters. One of the main characters is faced with a problem familiar to most debaters: how to answer the economic disadvantage. He handles it well through the use of antithesis, saying of his opponents, they would let the unemployed die so the economy can live. Dying is the antithesis to living, and when placed side by side, it makes clear the choice of competing values in the round to the judges. Heck, you could replace the unemployed and the economy with any two words and still have a profound sentence. Do it well, and it may be the most memorable line in the round for the judge. Another simple and powerful scheme is accumulatio. This is where a speaker reviews the points already made in the speech in a compact and forceful manner. If you place this list in order of increasing importance, then it is known as climax. This is a perfect scheme to use in the closing sentences of your last rebuttal. Imagine that you are yourself listing the arguments you are winning. If we don't win on topicality, then we win the economic disadvantage. And if not that, then politics, then the plan fall, then the solvency turn, then the uniqueness press. It sounds like there is too much to overcome. You could also repeat the same word. This scheme is also in the Great Debaters, and the example is when one of the debaters is giving her first rebuttal in competition, and she asserts, "The time for justice, the time for freedom, and the time for equality is always right now." None of these schemes require anyone using them to have any special gift of language. Well, maybe some of the more complicated rap lyrics. But most of these schemes are simple to use: repetition, contrast, and comparison. Whereas schemes are the resequencing of words within sentences, tropes modify the meaning of words themselves. One of the most famous rhetorical scholars of all time, Kenneth Burke, identified what he called the 4 master tropes. Burke considered these tropes to be more than merely wordplay. He saw the master tropes as ways to access and describe the truth. You may still be asking yourself, what's the difference between a trope and a scheme? Well, perhaps an example of one of the more popular tropes would help. Metaphor is a trope, and most people are familiar with metaphors because they make comparisons between things. Al Franken, a senator from Minnesota, used a metaphor to explain the scientists that deny climate change. He says, and I quote, "Say you went to a doctor who told you, you better start eating more sensibly and start exercising because you are tremendously overweight, and I see that your father died of a heart attack at an early age. So you've got to go on a diet and start working out. If 98 out of 100 doctors tell me that I've got a problem, I should take their advice. And if those 2 other doctors get paid by big snack food, like certain climate deniers get paid by big coal, I shouldn't take their advice. Well, 98 out of 100 climate scientists are telling us we've got a problem." Notice, this isn't about the order that he puts the words. It is about altering the meaning of the words for greater impact through comparison. That difference is what distinguishes schemes from tropes. Another trope is metonymy, where you refer to something associated with a word rather than the word itself. A simple example is how people refer to journalists as the press, in reference to the printing press, or the famous phrase, "the pen is mightier than the sword." This is helpful in debate because you can reference complicated concepts with simple language. Like instead of saying the United States federal government every time, you can say Washington. This reduces the chance of stumbles over long titles and even saves a bit of time, which could be crucial in close rounds. Synecdoche is a type of metonymy, and Kenneth Burke describes synecdoche as part of the whole, whole for the part, container for the contained, sign for the thing signified, material for the thing made, cause for the effect, effect for the cause, genus for the species, species for the genus. So this is a really long way of explaining that you use a part to reference the whole. For instance, calling a car a set of wheels is an example of synecdoche. But you could also refer to fossil fuels as coal. In fact, you could refer to the entire process of extracting fossil fuels, burning them, and converting the power into electricity as using coal. This, again, saves time and creates a memorable reference point for your judge and or audience. The last major trope is irony, and this has a confusing role in debate. Irony is hard to define, but a common, yet overly simplistic definition is that irony is when the intended meaning of your words is opposite of their actual meaning. For instance, if there was no smoking sign inside a tobacco shop, that would be ironic. But how do you use irony in debate? The way it is most often seen is when opponents, quote, praise the arguments of their opponents, but they are actually ridiculing them. Some people confuse irony with sarcasm, and for good reason. Both are similar and related, but not synonymous. How to use irony, or really whether or not to use irony in debate, is a bit of a controversy itself. If done wrong, judges are confused and don't know the point you are trying to make. But if done well, can be tremendously entertaining and greatly enhance the credibility of the speaker. Perhaps the best contemporary examples of using irony to make socially significant arguments are The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and The Colbert Report. For instance, Stephen Colbert once ironically opposed the theory that global warming is occurring and cited, quote, noted climatologist billionaire Donald Trump. Notice how easy it is to discredit a source with ironic qualifications. Donald Trump is not a climatologist, he's a businessman. This one simple way to deploy irony in an argument, but irony could be the basis for entire positions like disadvantages, counterplans, and even affirmative cases. Unfortunately, there isn't much guidance on how to use irony in debate beyond this. It is easy to see debate as a language game. Therefore, you should play with language when you debate. Figures of speech are short and simple ways to play with language that might make the difference between a win and a loss. Figures of speech can be used to justify an unorthodox interpretation of the resolution, giving you access to your favorite arguments. Figures of speech can make your arguments more memorable than your opponents, giving you a slightly better chance of winning a ballot. Figures of speech help you say more with less, giving you more time for arguments. And there are dozens of them. If you want to look up more figures of speech, all you need to do is go on Wikipedia and look it up. They have a nice long list that will keep you occupied for hours. There's something about a uniquely worded idea that is mesmerizing to humans. Whether it is word magnets, Mad Libs, Scrabble, Hangman, or any of the hundreds of other language games you play, a well-worded sentence changes lives.